Picture this: 5 innocent children, their whole lives ahead of them, smiling in family photos, playing without a care in the world. Now imagine that within a single night, every single one of them is gone. Not from an accident, not from a stranger, but at the hands of the one person meant to protect them, their own father. This isn't just another true crime story. This is a nightmare, a brutal, senseless tragedy that could have been prevented. A mother's warning ignored, a system that failed, and a father who spiraled into darkness, making an unthinkable choice. But why? What pushed Timothy Jones Jr. to murder his own children? And could someone, anyone, have stopped him before it was too late? Before we dive into this chilling case, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Here at Silent Weekend Crimes, we uncover the darkest stories, the ones that stay with you long after the video ends. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's start from the beginning. At first glance, Timothy Jones Jr. seemed like the kind of man who had it all together. A successful computer engineer, a father of 5 beautiful children, a man providing for his family. On paper, he was the definition of responsibility. A steady job at Intel, a home for his kids, a structured routine. But behind closed doors, the reality was far more disturbing. Because Timothy Jones Jr. wasn't just a father, he was a man unraveling. A man consumed by control, by rage, by the weight of his own demons. And what started as strict discipline, religious fanaticism, and a failing marriage, would soon spiral into one of the most horrifying crimes South Carolina had ever seen. So how does a bright, successful man go from coding at a high-paying job to standing trial for the murder of his own children? Let's go back to where it all began. Timothy Jones Jr., a father of 5, a man with a stable career, a seemingly normal life. He had a good job as a computer engineer, a steady income, and a home filled with children who loved him. On the outside, he looked like the picture of responsibility. A man who had it all together. But behind closed doors, a much darker reality was playing out. A father who didn't just fail his children, he became their worst nightmare. Because how does a man go from tucking his children into bed at night, to ending their lives with his own hands? How does a father who once kissed scraped knees and read bedtime stories, later stuff his children's lifeless bodies into garbage bags and dump them on the side of a road? This isn't just a crime story. This is a descent into madness. A slow, terrifying unraveling of a man who claimed to love his children, yet did the unthinkable. And the most chilling part? There were warning signs. So many red flags. But no one stopped him in time. Tonight, we're going to piece together the disturbing path that led to one of the most horrific crimes in South Carolina's history. But before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed to Silent Weekend Crimes and turn on notifications so you never miss a case like this. Trust me, you won't want to look away. Let's go back. Back to where it all began. Before Timothy Jones Jr. became the man capable of unspeakable horror, he was just a husband, a father, a provider, and at one point, a man that Amber Kaiser loved. Amber and Timothy's marriage wasn't always a nightmare. In the beginning, it was filled with promises, dreams of a happy home, raising their children together. But what started as a partnership slowly turned into something much darker. Timothy wasn't just a devoted father. He was a man consumed by control. His religious beliefs became more extreme, his rules more rigid. In his world, a wife's role was simple: obey. At first, Amber tried to keep the peace, to make it work for the sake of their growing family. But as Timothy's grip tightened, so did the tension in their home. His discipline became strict, then harsh, then outright cruel. He believed in spare the rod, spoil the child. Except his version of discipline left bruises, both physical and emotional. And Amber? She was powerless against the man who was supposed to protect them. Eventually, she made a choice that many women in abusive situations struggle with. She left. She walked away from the marriage, hoping to escape his control. But in a cruel twist of fate, Timothy was the one with the stable job, the financial security. And in the eyes of the court, that made him the better parent. Amber lost custody of her 5 children. And just like that, Timothy had complete control. If the warning signs weren't clear before, they were about to become impossible to ignore. Because what happened inside that home after Amber left would set the stage for one of the most horrifying crimes this town had ever seen. Sometimes the people who see the truth aren't family, friends, or even neighbors. Sometimes they're the ones who spend hours behind closed doors, watching everything unfold, the babysitters. And what they saw inside Timothy Jones Jr.'s home, it was something straight out of a nightmare. Crystal Ballantyne was just 17 years old when she stepped into Timothy's world. She thought she was just babysitting. Instead, she found herself trapped in something far more disturbing. Timothy didn't just hire her to watch the kids, he pulled her into his twisted reality. In no time she went from babysitter to live-in lover. A teenager under his complete control. Crystal later testified that she watched Timothy discipline his children in ways no parent ever should. The punishments weren't just strict, they were brutal. Children were whipped for the smallest infractions, forced into exhausting exercises until they collapsed. The rules in that house weren't just strict, they were terrifying. And when Crystal finally had enough, she ran. She escaped. But she wasn't the only one who saw what was happening. There were others. Babysitters who came and went, each one seeing things they couldn't forget. Trash piling up in every corner, roaches scurrying across the floors. But the worst part? The children. The fear in their eyes. The way they flinched at their father's voice. They weren't just being raised by a strict man, they were being raised by a monster. One babysitter, Joy Lorick, would later recall one heartbreaking moment. Just before she left for the day, the children begged her, "Please don't tell Daddy you fed us, because he might not feed us again." Imagine that. Children so terrified of their own father that a simple meal was a dangerous secret. Then came the Disney World trip. A place where families create memories, where kids run free with joy. But for Timothy's children, it was just another nightmare in disguise. Joy Lorick was there. She saw it with her own eyes. Timothy pulling down the pants of his 2-year-old and 6-year-old sons and beating them. Right there, in the middle of the so-called happiest place on earth. She tried to stop him. She told him to stop. And for once he did. But it wasn't enough. Because by then the damage was already done. The fear, the pain, the suffering, these children were trapped in a life they couldn't escape. The babysitters saw the warning signs. They reported what they could. But nothing changed. Timothy Jones Jr. still had full control. And soon, the unthinkable would happen. When a child is in danger, there are supposed to be safety nets. Systems designed to step in, investigate, and protect the innocent. But what happens when those systems fail? When warning signs are ignored? When cries for help are met with silence? For the 5 children of Timothy Jones Jr., DSS wasn't just a missed opportunity. It was their last chance, and it slipped right through the cracks. By the time DSS got its first official report on Timothy Jones Jr., the warning signs had already been there for years. But in May 2014 things escalated. Someone finally reported him. Social workers showed up at his home, investigating claims that he had manhandled his 6-year-old son, Natan. And what did DSS do? They made him write a promise. A piece of paper stating that he wouldn't spank or hit his children again. That's it. No follow-ups. No real consequences. Just words on a page, as if a monster could be stopped by a written agreement. But Timothy? He wasn't a man of his word. He was a man of control. And the moment DSS walked out that door, his reign of terror continued. Fast forward to August. A babysitter, Joy Lorick, had seen enough. She watched as Jones whipped his children with belts, forced them into brutal punishments, and kept them malnourished on a diet of nothing but oatmeal. She knew she couldn't stay silent. So she made the call. She reported him to DSS, telling them what was happening behind closed doors. And what did DSS do this time? Nothing. No emergency intervention. No removal of the children. No investigation strong enough to shake Timothy's hold on his home. The report was there. The evidence was there. But DSS was nowhere. It's a haunting reality. DSS had not one but 2 chances to step in and save these children. 2 separate reports. 2 moments where things could have gone differently. But the system failed. And because of that failure, the clock was already ticking towards something unimaginable. Just weeks later, those 5 children, Mara, Elias, Natan, Gabriel, and Abigail, would be dead. There were warnings. There were witnesses. There were red flags so bright they should have been impossible to ignore. But nothing was done. And in the end, Timothy Jones Jr. was free to do what he had always wanted. Maintain absolute control. Even if it meant killing his own children. The system was supposed to protect them. Instead, it left them to die. A father is supposed to protect. A father is supposed to love. But on one horrifying night in August 2014, Timothy Jones Jr. became the very thing his children feared the most. And once he crossed the line, there was no turning back. Timothy Jones Jr. had always been controlling, disciplining his children with an iron fist. But by the summer of 2014, that control had turned into full-blown paranoia. And his target? his 6-year-old son Nathan. Jones believed, truly believed, that Nathan was conspiring against him. A 6-year-old. In his delusional mind, this little boy was plotting with his mother Amber Kaiser to overthrow him, to destroy his authority, to ruin his life. And to Jones there was only one way to stop it. On that fateful night, Jones ordered Nathan to exercise his punishment. But this wasn't just a few jumping jacks or push-ups. This was relentless. Hours of running in place. Endless drills until his little body gave out. Until he collapsed. Jones didn't stop. He didn't give Nathan water. He didn't check if his son was okay. Instead, he stood over him as the life drained from his small body. Until he stopped breathing. That was the moment. The moment Jones crossed the threshold from an abusive father to a murderer. I have to kill them all. This is where the horror should have stopped. A moment of clarity. A chance to call for help. But Jones didn't see it that way. In his twisted mind, Nathan's death wasn't a tragedy, it was a problem. One that needed to be solved. And the only way to fix it was to get rid of the witnesses. In his sick logic, if one child was dead, they all had to die. And so, one by one, he turned to his remaining 4 children. 8-year-old Mara. The oldest. The big sister. She had always tried to protect her younger siblings. But there was no protecting them from the monster in front of them. He strangled her with his bare hands. 7-year-old Elias. The sweet, kind-hearted boy. He was next. Jones choked the life out of him, silencing him forever. 2-year-old Gabriel. So small. Too little to understand what was happening. Jones used a belt to wrap around his tiny neck because his hands were too big. And finally, 1-year-old Abigail. Just a baby. Just learning to walk. Just starting to speak. She didn't stand a chance. And then, silence. 5 innocent lives stolen. 5 little bodies, lifeless in the home that was supposed to be their safe place. Jones didn't cry. He didn't break down. He didn't call for help. Instead, he did the unthinkable. He stuffed his children's bodies into garbage bags as if they were nothing more than trash. But he wasn't done yet. No, Timothy Jones Jr. still had one more plan. A plan to cover up what he had done. And so, with 5 small bodies in the back of his SUV, he hit the road. The question now wasn't just why he did it. It was, what was he going to do next? 5 lifeless bodies. 5 little souls. And the man who took their lives was now on the move. Timothy Jones Jr. wasn't panicking. He wasn't rushing to turn himself in. No, he was driving. With his children's corpses stuffed in garbage bags, crammed into the back of his SUV, he hit the road like a man without a conscience. And for the next several days he drove. Mile after mile, state after state, with the undeniable stench of death following him. Jones didn't have a clear plan. He had no destination. He just drove, through South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, spiraling further into insanity with each passing mile. And in those days he lived like a man who had nothing left to lose. He blasted music. He drank heavily. He smoked synthetic marijuana, also known as spice, a drug known to cause extreme paranoia and hallucinations. He even stopped at fast food joints, ordering meals as if his kids weren't decomposing just feet away from him. Can you imagine? Can you even begin to process that level of detachment? 5 children, his own children, rotting in his car, and yet he was out here eating burgers, getting high, and driving like nothing happened. But eventually, reality caught up with him. The bodies were decomposing fast and the smell was impossible to ignore. He knew he couldn't keep driving forever. He needed to get rid of the evidence. So, on a remote, lonely stretch of land near Camden, Alabama, Jones made his final stop. He pulled over, took out the garbage bags one by one, and dumped them like trash on the side of a hill. No burials. No prayers. No goodbyes. Just a father discarding his children like they meant nothing to him. Jones might have thought he was free. That he had covered his tracks. But he was sloppy and fate had other plans. Because just a short time later, at a routine traffic checkpoint in Smith County, Mississippi, Timothy Jones Jr. was about to make one final mistake. A mistake that would blow his cover and expose the horror of what he had done. It was a routine traffic stop. A random checkpoint on a quiet road in Smith County, Mississippi. Nothing out of the ordinary, until Timothy Jones Jr. rolled up in his Cadillac Escalade. The officer approached the driver's side window, expecting just another quick check. But the second he got close, something was off. Way off. It started with the smell. That gut-wrenching, unmistakable stench of decay. Of something dead. The officer took a step back. His instincts screamed at him. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a tired driver or a guy hiding a bag of weed. This was something far worse. And then there was Jones himself. Sweating. Fidgeting. Talking too much and saying too little. He claimed he was coming back from a family vacation. But the officer wasn't buying it. Backup arrived. The officers started searching the SUV. The smell, overpowering now, seeped into everything. And then, they found it. Traces of blood. Garbage bags. Horrifying evidence of something unspeakable. And finally, in that moment, Jones cracked. Without hesitation, without remorse, he spilled it all. He told them everything. How he had killed his children. How their bodies had been decomposing in his car for days. How he had dumped them on a lonely hillside in Alabama like yesterday's trash. And he said it all so casually. Like he was just explaining a bad decision, not confessing to one of the most horrifying crimes in South Carolina's history. The officers were stunned. The weight of what they had just uncovered settled over them like a nightmare. Timothy Jones Jr. was arrested on the spot. And just like that, his days of running were over. But now the real question remained, what kind of man could do this? And what would justice look like for the 5 innocent lives he had taken? 5 children. 5 innocent lives taken in the most unimaginable way. And now, the man responsible sat in a courtroom, facing the ultimate judgment. But this trial wasn't just about guilt. The jury already knew Timothy Jones Jr. had killed his kids. The real battle? Whether he was a cold-blooded murderer, or a broken man lost in insanity. From day one, prosecutors made it clear, this was not a crime of madness. This was calculated. Jones drove around with his children's bodies for days. He cleaned up evidence. He ran. He lied. Those weren't the actions of a man who had lost his grip on reality. Those were the actions of a man who knew he had done something horrific and was trying to get away with it. They painted Jones as a manipulative monster. A man who used his intelligence, his supposed brilliance, to control, punish, and ultimately destroy his own family. And they had the evidence to prove it. But then the defense took their turn. And they had a different story to tell. They brought in psychologists, family members, anyone who could give insight into Timothy Jones Jr.'s unraveling mind. His stepmother took the stand, speaking of the abuse he suffered as a child. His father, broken, ashamed, tried to explain how his son had never been normal. The pressures, the expectations, the isolation, all of it leading to this moment. Mental illness. Psychotic breakdown. A father who was pushed past his breaking point. That was their argument. Jones wasn't evil, they said, he was sick. And then came the moment no one saw coming. Amber Kaiser. The mother of those 5 children. The woman who had every reason to want Jones dead. She took the stand, and when she spoke, the courtroom held its breath. He did not show my children any mercy by any means, she said. But my kids loved him. And if I'm speaking on behalf of my kids and not myself, that's what I have to say. A plea for mercy. From the one person who had suffered the most. Gasps. So, even the prosecutors looked stunned. No one expected this. The jury had a decision to make. And suddenly, it wasn't so simple. Would the jury see Timothy Jones Jr. as a cold-blooded killer deserving of death? Or a man so damaged by life that he no longer knew right from wrong? The answer was coming. 12 jurors. 5 innocent lives stolen. And one final decision that would determine whether Timothy Jones Jr. would live or die. 4 hours, the courtroom sat in silence, waiting. Amber Kaiser, the mother who lost everything, sat motionless, her hands gripping the edge of the seat. Prosecutors stood firm, their faces unreadable. Jones himself? He barely moved. And then the verdict was read. The jury had already convicted Jones of murder. That was never in question. But now they had to decide if his crimes were horrifying enough to warrant the ultimate punishment, death. The prosecution had made their case. Jones was fully aware of what he had done. He didn't kill in a blind rage. He made a decision, one that robbed 5 children of their futures. But then there was Amber's plea for mercy. A mother who had suffered more than anyone, asking them not to take his life. In the end, the jury's decision shocked some, and left others questioning whether true justice had been served. When the sentence was read, Amber Kaiser's face was unreadable. She had said her piece. But inside, the emotions were tearing her apart. There is no justice in this, she later said. No matter what happens, my babies are still gone. For the public, reactions were mixed. Some believed Jones deserved worse than death. Others felt a lifetime in prison was a far worse fate. But in the end, the question remained, could anything truly bring justice to 5 innocent children who never had a chance? The trial was over. The sentence was given. But what happened next? And what can we learn from the failures that allowed this tragedy to happen? In our final chapter, we look beyond the courtroom, at the lasting impact of this horrific case. 5 children. 5 innocent souls. Taken not by a stranger, not by some outside evil, but by their own father. And the most haunting part? They could have been saved. This wasn't a sudden act of violence. There were warning signs, so many warning signs. Babysitters reported the abuse. Teachers noticed. DSS was called. Twice. But somehow, Timothy Jones Jr. was still allowed to keep custody of his children. And because of that failure, they never made it out alive. In May 2014, DSS had its chance. They investigated after Jones manhandled his son. He was forced to sign a written promise not to hurt them again. A piece of paper. That's all that stood between these kids and their fate. In August 2014, another call was made. Another warning. But DSS never followed through. And just weeks later, the murders happened. It's the question that will haunt us forever. What if DSS had stepped in? What if someone had done more? Would Mara, Elias, Natan, Gabriel, and Abigail still be here today? We'll never know. But what we do know is this, the system failed them. And they paid the ultimate price. This case wasn't just about Timothy Jones Jr., it was about 5 little lives lost too soon. It was about a system that didn't listen. And it's about us, because if we don't learn from this, if we don't fight for change, then what stops it from happening again? Justice was served in the courtroom. But true justice? True justice would have been saving these children before it was too late. Let's make sure this never happens again. If you made it this far, take a second to subscribe. Because stories like this matter. And the more we shine a light on these cases, the more we can push for change. Thank you for watching Silent Weekend Crimes. Stay safe, and stay aware.